Welcome to the Veriff Voices podcast, a collection of conversations with leaders from across the industry, sharing tips and valuable insight into shaping the future of online identity. This podcast is brought to you by the people of Veriff, rebuilding trust in the digital world. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Veriff Voices, the podcast where we talk about fraud, compliance, tech, and everything identity verification related. The subject we're going to cover today is actually around culture, specifically company culture, specifically Veriff's company culture, but also in a much wider sense as well. And joining me to do so is my colleague here, our VP of People, Luke Govier. I'm going to welcome Luke in a moment. I just want to say before we do that this is a subject that's very interesting. It has come up quite a lot recently. I'm very lucky in my position. I get to talk to customers all of the time. And one of the questions I ask them is, what are the reasons that they joined Veriff in the first place? Now, obviously, there is things like product alignment and the industry expertise and this kind of thing. But I'm hearing more and more frequently an alignment around culture as well, being one of the main drivers for these partnerships to come around in the first place. So it's very, very timely, and I'm very, very excited to explore this topic in a bit more detail. So, Luke, first of all, welcome and thank you for joining us. And second of all, just give us a little bit of an intro to yourself, your role, and maybe a bit of your background too.
Yeah, so I'm the VP of People and Veriff. I joined here around 2.5 years ago as the head of talent acquisition, and my background is very much in recruitment. So prior to here, I worked for a Series B payments fintech. We went from 200 to 1,200 in around 2 years, so pretty intense. Prior to that, I was at WeWork, which I'm sure everyone on here has seen documentaries and Apple TV series. That was quite a ride. I was number 50 in Europe there, so yeah, really exciting. And then prior to that, it was just more recruitment through an agency and a consultancy model. But yeah, been at Veriff 2.5 years. Really enjoyed the ride and had a great journey here.
Amazing. All right, and let's just get into Veriff's culture then, because I think that as I say, it is as in the intro there that it is something that comes up quite a lot, and it's something a lot of employees and I've certainly noticed. But it's worth pointing out that none of this is by accident as well. It's quite a deliberate process. So let's talk about that then. What is it about Veriff's culture that makes it so special, in your opinion?
We've got a really strong mission that runs through the core of what we do. And I think, every scale-up has its ups and downs. You see a lot of these graphs on LinkedIn and other platforms, and it shows, it's not just from the bottom left to the top right. There's a lot of ups and downs along the way. I think what's special about our culture is, the resilience and the tenacity that the team have shown during the downtimes to make sure that we keep that mission focus, keep that mission alignment, and keep working towards it. That's been really inspiring for me. And I think the second part is I've never worked in a company with quite such a diverse workforce. Prior to here, Dojo was a UK-based company, so we had a lot of, London's a hotbed of talent, right? And it's a hotbed of geographical talent. But being an Estonia HQ business, it's only 1 million people as it is. And there's a real culture there and a real mindset around bringing the best people in the world together into the country and relocating people from all over the world. So I think when I joined, we had maybe 45 different nationalities represented, which when you're 300 people, which we were at the time, it's a pretty impressive metric. And the kind of perspectives you get and, the environment you operate in, it's just different to what I've seen before.
What would you say? You mentioned in your intro there, talking about sort of working with the likes of WeWork, for example. What's the sort of the difference, do you think, in working for a company of Veriff size versus one of those more sort of established organizations? And what are some of the things you would call out there as being sort of unique to Veriff there?
When you're in a smaller company or a scaling company, shall we say, a lot of the things that need to be done aren't done yet. It's a build phase. And that's amazing for a lot of people. If you go to a huge business, earlier in my career, I worked on site at companies like Cisco, Arab, Greco, these big Fortune, FTSE 100 businesses. And they were brilliant. They would just operate so well. And you're effectively a cog in the machine. And yeah, it's really impressive. But for me, impact's the biggest thing I want to have. And I always found it a bit difficult to have impact in that sort of context. So if you come to a scaling business, like the pro is you can have the impact. The con is obviously everything isn't super mature and always kind of where it needs to be effectively. So that's brilliant. You can have a lot of impact. You get much more exposed to the leadership. So again, in bigger companies, you may deal with the head of or the director, the VP, etc. But you don't normally have the opportunity to have the influence right at the very top. And that's what scale-ups can offer you, is you work really closely with the founders, the leaders, etc. And it means that you can experiment, you can innovate, and you can get exposure to things that you wouldn't in a bigger company.
Do you think too, just kind of just picking up on that point there, do you think that kind of attracts a certain personality type of person as well? I mean, somebody who kind of thrives in that environment where there are sort of opportunities available to but both grow professionally, but also in a personal sense as well, I suppose. Do you think that's something that is kind of one of the reasons for the culture, is that it's attracting these kind of similar like-minded people, I suppose?
Yeah, overall, yes. Everyone has different priorities in life, and you see a lot of people talking about you've got like 5 plates that you have to spin: your family, your friends, your hobbies, your work, etc. And I think if you're going to a scale up, work does inevitably play a bit of a disproportionately large part of your plate spinning. And one of the things you have to be really careful of is not to let the other plates drop. And I think sometimes in more mature businesses, maybe it's easier to have a healthier plate spin. This analogy is going a bit weird, but you get my point. It's easier to have a healthier plate spin, whereas when you're in a scaling business where new clients are critical and projects are really critical to the success of the business, sometimes you have to go above and beyond in a way that you may not do in other sort of environments. And I think that's the biggest thing. It's people that really want to, do that little bit extra, particularly earlier on in their career, or want to just try really new things. It's quite hard to innovate in a bigger business. It's just slower. There's more approvals. There's more people to factor in. But for me, I mean, we're around 450 employees right now. I know I can try things. I know I can try anything really. And either it succeeds and we do great, or we fail fast and we move on to the next thing. But you're able to iterate and operate at a much quicker speed. So I'd say, people that I guess really want to have impact, and B, people that really want to innovate typically would end up in this kind of business.
Yeah, and I can certainly sort of vouch for that from my experience here at Veriff too. And I think another thing that sort of plays into this, I suppose, is it's kind of being trusted a little bit as well, right? You're kind of brought in with your, for your expertise and for the experience that you're bringing. And you mentioned about sort of failing fast and that kind of thing there too. I think that there's a certain element of trust that comes into that, right? In terms of the trust from the employer to the employee there. And that makes things quite exciting, and you have that sort of responsibility too, I suppose. Let's just, as an employee there, then, what is it that, what are some of the things that you've heard from various teams? I can obviously speak from my own experience, but you're a lot more exposed to this on a wider sense than I am. So what are some of the things in particular that people are calling out in terms of what makes sort of working for a scale-up organization like Veriff, quite an exciting place to be?
Yeah, and you called one of them out there, which is career opportunities. There's a lot of trust placed in you in companies like this, and you get a chance to prove yourself, build a reputation. Everyone will know you because it's a smaller business, and then you can leverage that and get the progression you're looking for. So, even in my case, I joined as a head of TA. I had no prior experience as a VP of people, but I built my reputation. I did a lot of good things. I gradually got more and more exposure through workplace and the analytics teams that I had, and then you get the opportunity to have the role. Now I'm one of tens, if not hundreds, of people that have had that sort of story to tell, where they've been given an opportunity that they maybe wouldn't have in another company. So that really does get called out a lot. And I've mentioned it a couple of times, that innovation point, but particularly because of what we're doing, because we're a tech product driven business, you have that opportunity to innovate so much more. And there's a lot of things we've trialed here. I used the people team example again, because it's easy to use that, right? But there's a lot of SaaS products or methodologies that we've adopted, whether it's around engagement surveys, performance frameworks, etc., that you wouldn't be able to do that in a different company. That's one of the beauties about being here.
And also, I think it's, I mentioned this at the beginning about this kind of similarity in values between us and our customers. And I think the fact that we're working with lots of innovative companies as well is kind of, maybe the reason for this. Yeah, that sort of alignment there, because they're in a similar position to us, so they can kind of recognize that, the impact-driven stuff that exactly what we were saying there. Let's just flip that on its head a little bit then. So what would be some of the challenges at sort of working or creating culture? So, for an employee at an organization like this, what do you sort of see as the flip side?
No challenges, Chris. It's all growth. All growth. Well, I take one of the positives I mentioned around career progression, and I guess the flip side of that is you're not always going to be surrounded by the most experienced leaders. There's people that get opportunities, and it's kind of a mutual agreement there that you're going to give people a chance, but they're not going to necessarily be 100% on day one. And that's okay. It's a pro and a con, depending on the way you look at something like that. I mentioned at the start around processes and around things being super mature. It's not like that here. I mean, we've got a lot better since I've been here. When I joined 2.5 years ago, we were further behind in the journey. Now we're further along in the journey, but there's still more of the journey to go. So I guess plugging from a recruitment perspective here, if you do want everything I've described, we still offer that. It's just, we're further along in our maturity journey than we were. But, if you're someone that thrives in a really structured environment, or, you need a process built out for everything that you do, you're probably going to get a bit frustrated here. So that's the second thing. And then I guess the third thing when you're scaling is you don't always have, we've had ups and downs, and some quite publicized, others not. If you're in a billion revenue business and things are great, I mean, we've seen it a bit with the FAANG companies, that it's not necessarily the same level of job security, but you are more at the whim of the market to some extent. And, we're in a very good place as a company, very financially sound, etc. But you don't have that same level of security that you necessarily would have if you were just, in theory, a humongous 50-year-old successful business. And so I guess that's a little bit of a con. But generally speaking, I think the pros far outweigh them. As long as you know all of this stuff going into it and it suits your personality and your character, you don't see them as cons, you just see them as opportunities.
You mentioned being at the whim of the market to a certain extent, and being a sort of an innovative, growing business is not necessarily always smooth progress. It's quite turbulent sometimes, actually, and there are some sort of ups and downs with it all. How do you get your team on board, sort of aligned and motivated in that kind of constant state of change that we find ourselves in?
Yeah, so this was a really good point, actually, because when I first went into the role, the first thing I wanted to do was set a strategy for the team and a vision for the division, as we call it. So I'm going to copyright that. I want to set the vision for the division, and it's exactly that. You pivot so much, there's so much change. And what I found is I've basically made something that was kind of generic, but then could also be quite specific. So we have this vision around 4 core pillars to the people vision: attraction, experience, engagement, and performance. And those 4 things combined lead to results. And the mindset behind it is to get results, you need performance. To get performance, you need engaged people. To engage them, they need an amazing experience. And then to do all of that, you need to attract the right people in the first place. So the team know that's the vision. And then we've got a lot of aspects of our role and what our team do that come under each of the 4 pillars. And you essentially see them as almost like a product approach, where you're just constantly trying to evolve those 4 pillars. So that's a bit specific for the answer, but the concept is it's about having something that is kind of generic enough that can be adapted to the circumstance, but then is still specific enough that they know where you're heading and what their focus should be.
I like that. So having sort of a basis of consistency, really, that's sort of underpinning everything you do, that allows you to pivot off in different directions. Yeah, that's great. And I think you kind of mentioned at the beginning there that Veriff, when you joined, I mean specifically now, but also a couple of years ago too, was always a very diverse place to work in terms of people from different nationalities and backgrounds and so on. I don't think that's by accident either. I think that's one of those things that kind of, the certain personality types have been attracted to the roles that we've got and to the company that we are and that kind of thing. But I think there's a little sort of deliberate work behind the scenes that goes into that too, which is probably unseen, I think, by most people, certainly with our business, but almost certainly externally too. What's been your experience of kind of building that kind of inclusive and diverse team that we've got? Are there any sort of tips that you would throw in here for somebody who is in a similar situation at another company?
Yeah, I think the key is to think of it as it's the DEIB aspect, right? So a lot of people, when they talk about this, they just think, all right, we'll make quotas, or all right, we're going to make a really concerted effort to hire an underrepresented trait. And yeah, that's obviously important. You do need to be concerted and targeted, but you need to remember the equality, the inclusivity, the belonging, because all that happens in most companies that really put a focus on this is they find someone and then they join the environment, they look around and think, I don't belong here. This isn't for me. And they leave. And then you're back in the same situation all over again. So it's about making sure you focus on all of that. And that was one of the luxuries we have. When I joined them with 300 people and 50 different nationalities, kind of inherent that just naturally is what happens. And it's super interesting. You learn about loads of different holidays, for example, or the meanings behind things. And so I think with the intention aspect, yes, you do need to kind of intentionally want to focus on this. But you've got to think of all 4 of those areas. You don't just go out there and post on techfemailejobs.com. I think you're going to solve all your problems, which you kind of laugh and joke about it, right? But so many people, that is the extent of strategy, and it just doesn't work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've definitely seen this from my experience of companies kind of paying lip service to this stuff. And it just, you can see through it almost immediately. I think that when a company really does believe it, and it is part of their, embedded in their values, that comes across, I think, in the interactions that company has with other, with customers, with whenever they're in the market, talking to prospects and so on. It's, I think it just kind of just seeps through as almost like a natural thing. But as I said, there's a lot of deliberate work that goes behind the scenes to make that happen. So I think that's a real credit to you and your team there. Let's talk specifically about kind of about company culture. We mentioned a moment ago, sometimes companies go through turbulent times and things like that, and there's a sort of a real need there, I think, to have kind of very fast and clear decision making. So I mean, you kind of alluded to it a little bit in your one of your previous answers there, but what advice would you give around building a culture that kind of leads to good decision making and execution as well? I think is there anything that any sort of real clear tips here that you would give to sort of prompt this?
I read the Netflix book a couple of years ago, and there's a lot about that culture there. I don't think is relevant for a company like ours, but there's some that is really good. And one of the things I really liked was around the informed captive principle. And I don't think it originates there. It's just when I first became exposed to it. And it's about pushing decision-making to the most informed person within the business. So I've seen in a lot of companies, particularly scale-ups, decisions go to the top, then you'll have a group discussion, but the people having that discussion are a bit removed from the realities of the decision. They then push the decision down, might be right, might be wrong, which is slower, it dissolves accountability, and I think you're less likely to get the right outcome. So in my opinion, you need to make sure that you trust the people that you've got in the roles that you've got them in, and then be comfortable to push decision-making down to them. I think the role of leaders, founders, etc., is really to set the context for the business. Set the context so people know what decision we're heading in, what are the objectives of the company, what is it we're trying to do, and then let them make the decision that lead us to that. So, I mean, that, it sounds so preachy when I say it, and it's been a journey for us. I mean, when I joined, I think we were more push it upwards, and there were pockets where we did the informed captain, and like with everything about the journey, we're further along in the journey now. So some of the way we're operating is kind of moving in that direction more and more, and I think that's great, and it's what it needs to do. But I'm not sitting here from some ivory tower saying we've got that completely nailed. It's difficult, and there's a lot of training that needs to be done with managers around maybe topics they don't always have to think about, like return on investment. And risk versus reward. And, it's not just how to lead a good team as a manager, it's about factoring in all of these sort of things as well. So you've got to train them, get them comfortable with that, be comfortable with trusting them. And then I think if we're talking about optimal cultures and the optimal answer, that's what you've got to get towards.
That's a great answer, actually. And I think it kind of segues into my next question, which is also talking about the sort of the mission and values. And a lot of employees that are with Veriff at the moment have kind of been attracted by what our mission is, and that's making the online world a safer place, essentially. But I think with your answer kind of there, just alluded to it a little bit, is that a lot of this stuff is never a one and done. It needs sort of constant repetition, constant reinforcement to obviously new people in new roles and that kind of thing. They need to kind of be trained and empowered to kind of bring this stuff into their daily work every day. How do you go about doing that then? How do you sort of build a team and ensure the core values and the mission are kind of reflected in the culture and consistently and constantly so?
Yeah, you've got to embed them into your processes. I've seen it endlessly again, where you make a really nice poster, and that poster is branded, it looks great, it's in every office, on every wall, but that's the extent of values, and that you make them once and then you live with them as a company forever. I think what you need to do is find little touch points when you bring them in more. And a couple of examples for people through recognition programs or reward programs where you have values champions and do values-based awards. When you're doing performance evaluation, making sure that you're bringing the values into that. The kind of ethos being it's not just what you do, it's how you do it as well. And they're two examples, but I think it's about looking at your values and just thinking, how do we keep bringing these to life within the org? And, I say every time about the journey, we're on that journey. And, we've got some changes regarding that coming up where we're going to bring in much more emphasis on them. So I think that's part one. And part two is making sure they're fit for purpose. We've got a question in our engagement survey about, do you think the values are represented in our culture, etc.? And I think it's important to do those sanity checks as well as you go along, because your values when you're Series A are not your values when you IPO. They will just evolve with the company, and what you need from people changes. eventually all of that innovation we talk about and the trying different things and doing it quickly and failing fast, that's a hindrance. If you're 5,000 people and you're a public company, you can't actually operate that way. You need to be more structured. So if we're going to say always day one as an example, or focus on that entrepreneurial mindset, it's great for us. Probably not great if you meta something.
One of the things that I really like about our values is actually the emphasis that's placed on not only the individual, but the person as well, and kind of what it is that they can bring, but also sort of get out of working for Veriff in return almost. So let's talk a little bit around that, around sort of how do you kind of incorporate sort of the benefits, if you like, of what it is to be a Veriffian into the values and sort of the way that they're set up that way.
Yeah, good question. So I think you have to design your benefits knowing the culture that you have and the kind of way that the company operates. So I'll give an example. We do a lot of work around mental health support because working in the scale up can be draining. It can be intense at times. It's not to say everyone needs that because they work in a scale up. I'm not trying to put people off in that sense, but we talk about those spinning plates at the start. It can be a bit more of an intense spinning plate at times. So we do a lot of benefits around things like that. We have things like wellness budgets, sports and L&D budgets to help people, look after their physical and mental health alongside it. And I just think, generally speaking, people need to feel fairly compensated. And, when you look at a scale up, one of the big attractions is around stock options or, long-term incentive plans. And that's something you don't get in every company, but something we're really strong about. Every employee gets it. We want to make it tangible. We want to make it, valuable for people in the long term and share the success, essentially. So I think when you look at the way you structure your packages, yes, the basic salary is important, but you've got to have that shared success reward in there. Then you need to make sure you've got your focus on the core things that I think about, your pensions, your healthcares, your mental health, your sports and wellness, the L&Ds, all of those things that I think have a positive impact on your experience at work. So I think all of that wraps up into it.
Absolutely, yeah. I think things have moved on so much in the, I think of my journey through the world of work, if you like, over the last 10 years or so, and once upon a time it was kind of some bananas and some in the office and some bean bags. Kind of that was just the extent of what we got. But I think it's not so much also like it's what you get. You're investing so much of your time in working, and so it kind of makes sense that you get something back from that is kind of that is, I guess, understanding, I suppose, of your own, and everybody is different and individual in this case too, I suppose, and understanding people's differently and their kind of their approach to these things, I think is super, super important. But I think this has been a great episode. I just want to wrap up with one last question, because I think this is, we kind of asked this of everybody as well, just to kind of get your crystal ball out a little bit and say, what's going to be the journey for Veriff over the next 12 months from now? I mean, you mentioned it's very hard to predict.
Yeah, I guess rather than giving specifics and just doing a massive cop-out, what I will say is like the way we work as a division and in line with the way the company works is we like to innovate. We like to try new things. It's really rare that we'll take an out-of-the-box solution to something. It's all about testing, iterating, and trying to get the most optimal thing. And some things will go great. I'm already foreseeing we will do some great things, but I'm also foreseeing that some things will go wrong. And so I guess what I can say for the next 12 months is we're constantly going to experiment, innovate, and try and make this the best company to work for, in short. So yeah, I guess it's a watch this space.
I love that. And I think it's kind of a good way of summarizing actually too, because I think that sometimes it's kind of okay to say, we don't know what the future's going to bring, but we're going to try this and see if it works. If it doesn't, we'll go back to the drawing board, try again. And I think that to me probably sums up Veriff's values in a very short snippet more than anything else. It's really great to see. So Luke, thanks so much for joining. I think this is a really interesting conversation. I love talking about this stuff. It's very, very, well, it's enlightening to hear about it, what it's like from the inside point of view. As I say, I kind of hear, I live it every day with the work that we do, but it's also, I hear it so much from our customers now that I think the premium on a good culture is super high. And I think that's credit to you and your team. You've done an amazing job with it. So thank you very much.
Thanks.
This podcast is brought to you by Veriff. Identity verification made simple. Learn more at veriff.com.